Aloha mai kākoa and welcome to Understanding West Maui. My name is Alakai Lastimado today we are here with Ryan Tam. Aloha, Ryan.
Aloha.
Welcome. So you wrote about some of West Maui's transportation challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about what inspired you to go ahead and write this chapter?
Yeah. So actually, as it turned out, one of my colleagues, at the time I was working for the Honolulu Rail Transit Project, and so one of my colleagues, Ben Trevino, who was working on sustainable mobility aspects of the rail project, he mentioned that this project was happening and thought that I might be able to help out, and so I thought about it, and I was also interested.
Okay. So now you described in your chapter about Maui's transportation, how it evolved from railroads to highways. So how has the shift affected the working class?
Yeah. So
residents.
So the economic kind of shift, right, from railroads. So the railroads. I think Maui had. I think it was almost 200 miles of railway. That was all to support the sugarcane industry, right? And so that was a big technology that allowed agriculture and the economy of the island to kind of move in that direction, right? They also had a small commuter rail system, right, that took people from Wailuku down to Kahului and Paia, other parts. The main kind of shift towards highways, towards a roadway-based transportation system, allowed people, as the economy changed, right, from agriculture to more tourism-based economy, it kind of allowed people to live in different places from where they worked. So for example, and this is not necessarily in the book chapter, but my great-grandfather, Tam Yao, he was actually a merchant in Makawao town. And so he would go down to Kahului Harbor to pick up, I guess, goods and supplies and take it back up to Makawao to sell. And that was like a day and a half trip, right? So I think they would leave in the morning or even the night before, right? And I think sometimes if they didn't make it back all the way, they would even have to overnight halfway between Kahului and Makawao. And today that's a trip that takes what, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, right? Yeah. So it's nothing. So the shift, so that that's kind of one kind of data point, how it was right in the 1800s or early 1900s. As kind of the shift to automobiles. So my dad also grew up in Makawao. At one point, I think they had like a vacation. It was kind of like they had a cottage over in Kihei that they would spend weekends over there. I think my grandmother was a teacher. I don't know, Wailuku or Koa. And so, but eventually I think they ended up just living there, right? So this kind of, you could commute, right? With a car, you could commute suddenly between Kihei and Kahului or Wailuku. You could live in one place, work in another place. And that sort of has kept evolving, right? Highways kept getting built out. The economy, all the growth of the resorts in West Maui. So that kind of sprawl, essentially, right? So you have this disconnect between where people live and where people work. And so that's kind of been the biggest impact, right? And so that creates a system that's a lifestyle that makes you kind of rely on the automobile. You have to pay for the cost of cars. You have to pay for the cost of, the whole system. And so, yeah, it affects everybody's life, you know.
So you talked about, the car coming in, and it seems
Yep.
like right now the car is the only option for people to get around
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
Why do you think things like buses or bikes are not working?
So I think there are kind of two parts of it. So one is, we have we have a structure, we have an environment that's not necessarily conducive to walking and biking. First of all, right? So, first of all, the distances are long, so people have to go long distances from West Maui, for example, right? If you live in, on the other side of Maui, you have to drive. And there's no bike paths, so there's no kind of easy way to do it. At kind of the local level, streets, they don't all have sidewalks. It's hot, it's sunny, so they're not shaded, right? So there are lots of these kind of micro aspects of the environment that kind of discourage walking. In terms of, and things are spread out, right? So yeah, the stores are spread out. Before, I guess, like say in Makawao, you had the Azeka, or you had a small general store. Kihei, you had a Zeka store, and that you could just go there for your daily needs. You could just walk up there, like 7-Eleven, right? Something. Nowadays you got Whole Foods, you got Costco, where you have to buy things in bulk, and so it's a different, and you can't carry that with you. So it's a very different kind of system.
Yeah.
In terms of transit, at least when I was looking when I did kind of the research for this book chapter a few years ago, right? For transit to work, for transportation to work, it's about mobility is about freedom, right? So it's about when you want to go and where you can go, right? So that's kind of why people were attracted to the cars, at least at the beginning, right? Because it was great. You could go everywhere. You could go whenever you want, right? It had a lot of freedom. With a limited transit network, so like if Maui Bus or, elsewhere, a lot of public transit systems, they're costly to operate. So, you can fill a big bus. You can operate it once an hour from Kahului to Kihei, or to Lahaina, West Maui, right? For example. So if you need to go, right, that bus is not always there when you want to go.
Yep.
And it doesn't always go where you want it to go. So I think that's one of the big issues with alternative transportations. Here in Honolulu, in an urban area, and a lot of places, there's enough people, enough density. So there's a lot of people, so that you can actually support buses running every couple minutes, right? And that's what I think the goal of the rail system is also to do in Honolulu. So once you get that density and that mass, you can have transit that operates frequently, that suddenly it becomes an alternative. So in Vancouver, for example, they built they started in the 80s. They started developing an advanced light rail system, elevated, just SkyTrain, just like kind of what we have here on Oahu. And now I think their share of people walking or biking downtown it's over 50% of the trips. So you need a good kind of macro accessibility. You need to be able to go wherever you need to go, and then also you need to be able to make the small trips, that
So yeah, you went ahead and spoke about the light rail. You actually proposed the light rail as a sustainable transportation alternative
Yeah.
in West Maui.
Yeah.
How do you think it would improve the daily life for the residents and workers?
Yeah. So, light rail, and it's more the idea of light rail. It's not just about, this nice train, monorail, it's more than just about the transportation system, at least. When I was looking at this, it's more about the entire system. So the entire structure of the city and how it's kind of designed around a transportation system. When I first kind of got into the research, kind of the heavy writing on this, it was actually right at the start of the pandemic. And at that time, right, the streets were empty. Everything was quiet, right? You could hear the birds. At least in the city, it was really something. It was surreal. I still had to go to work every day, so I was biking to work, walking to work, and without having all the traffic, all the without having to deal with all that, it was really kind of it got me really thinking about it. And that was actually kind of one of these kind of light bulbs that went off. And then I started kind of, again, looking back to thinking about it and looking into more of the literature, right? So when you think about transit and light rail, what transit does is when you put a big transportation investment and you have stations, like fixed stations, what it does is it kind of attracts development around it, right? So people are more willing to build around it if they know that thousands of people a day are going to get on or off of a station. So that's kind of the big concept of this. It's about a light rail connection, connecting, being able to get from Kahului Airport to West Maui, in 30 minutes. But it's also about how you structure the development around these stations. So at each station, for example, you could create a transit-oriented community, right, where you have shops, you have housing, all within kind of walking distance. And you could even transform the kind of the visitor industry. Again, these are just ideas, right? You could transfer the visitor industry. So somebody could get off a plane at the airport, Kahului Airport, instead of taking a little shuttle to the rental car facility, getting a rental car, renting a car, driving, fighting the traffic, parking at the resort, paying a lot of money, right? They could just hop on a train, right? They have, and it's in the chapter. They have what's called diesel multiple units. So they have trains. You could put amenities on trains, right? So you could put snack bars, you could put all kinds of stuff, right? You could put bike racks. And so there's a train in Marin County, just north of San Francisco, that they have that. They have a snack bar on the train. So you could create a really nice environment, a really nice experience, and people could be relaxed. So the tourists would have a good time. For workers,
Yeah.
right? Ideally, you're kind of living around a rail station or transit station, and you're getting all your supplies. But if you have to make that long trip, right, you can be relaxed. You can have coffee. You could surfing the internet. So it could be transformational. So you could reduce the environmental footprint of the reduce the traffic, concentrate the development, concentrate the development around the stations. And then I think what's most important is that then you could actually, Revolt says that you keep the country, right? So you don't have to sprawl all the way. You don't have to take up all the ag land. So it's more efficient to develop all the utilities, right? If all the power, utilities, sewer, if they're all in kind of if they're already in a concentrated area in a community, you don't need to extend those lines out. You don't need to build the sewer systems. Every time I go to Maui, it seems like every time I go in, there's more and more development that's kind of going up on the ridges, right? So it's becoming like Oahu, or they're filling in the neck, and that's that. It doesn't need to necessarily be that way.
That way. So now you talked a little bit about how you mentioned owning a car, raises the cost of living.
Yeah.
So do you think that the light rail would factor into the affordability for housing and daily expenses?
Yeah. So, I was kind of surprised. When you look at the data again, I was looking at this in 2020. So some of the data was from a few years before that, but on average, each household is spending $4,700 a year to own and operate a car, right? That includes gas, insurance, right? You got to think about all that. So that's a big impact on, when you think that's a big impact on your budget, right? When you combine that with your housing costs and food costs and all that, right? If you could kind of take that out, you could create a more sustainable lifestyle potentially. So it has a big impact. I think the other thing, when you think about costs, convenience, cost and convenience. You got to maintain the car. It's a lot.
Yeah, no. So definitely, I think a light rail is interesting topic. Is controversial topic. And so I know one big issue I think people would have when it comes to a light rail is it be too expensive.
Yeah.
First off,
Yeah.
build it, and second of all is basically it's unrealistic. Right? Do we need it? So,
Yeah.
what would be your concerns? I mean, how would you respond to the concerns about the cost or the people that say it's unnecessary?
Yeah. So, couple things. One is, I mentioned that it costs on average $4,700. A household or the person is spending $4,700. On average, a year. And I think I've heard higher numbers too, right? 7,000. So that's just the kind of individual costs, right? The state and city is, state and county, they're spending money, $35, $40 million a year to operate and maintain the roads. And then collectively, when you look at how much each person on the island and each business is spending each year to operate their own and operate those cars, right? You add that up, it's probably, it's like $850 million a year, right? So it's not, this auto system is not cheap. So when you think about that, you kind of put it in context, right? So we're spending a lot of money on the cars. It's just how it's spent. There's also you can also think about the cost, for actually implementation, right? to actually develop a system, right? Yeah, it's expensive. Historically we've had a lot of federal money. You know, 60, 50, 60% of, the costs. Historically, it was even as much as 80% of the costs were provided by the federal government. So there's ways to capture that, or that would potential funding sources to support such an endeavor. There are ways, places like Hong Kong, where systems are actually, the transit system is actually profitable, right? So they actually incorporate all the development around the stations, and so they incorporate shopping malls into their stations. They're incorporating development, so they actually run a profit on their system. And they take that profit, they fund it into more transit. They sell the advertising, in the stations. So they're, in the U.S., I think we've been a lot more conservative, right? It's just transit, but I think, there are models where if you kind of integrate it, I think Japan is similar. In Montreal, they're doing they just developed this new light rail system using a public-private partnership. So they're bringing in financing from the private sector, and they're also, they call them dues, but they're basically taking, it's like a tax, or, a share of the property taxes from the areas right around the station. So one concept which I think's been explored, it's used elsewhere throughout the country and throughout the world. It's called tax increment financing, where you float bonds, or you basically use the future increases in property taxes. You take a share of that, and you can use that to finance infrastructure. So, for example, if you build a transit station or a development, right? If you had a building that goes up with, I don't know, 100, 200 people living in it, right? The actual value of the property goes way up, right? Because you have all these people living in it, they're all paying taxes, right? So you could actually take a small share of that, and you could actually use that to actually fund the infrastructure or the transit system, the station, right? Over time, and then that after that all gets paid off, then that goes away. So there are ways to make it. It's just, we got to be creative. And
So let's say the rail isn't built.
yeah.
Okay, let's say the rail isn't built.
Yeah.
So what are some other improvements that would make the public transportation more viable for everyday workers?
Yeah. So that's and that's kind of the last part of the chapter, is this idea of kind of bus rapid transit. So Maui bus, it's great. It's pretty amazing system that's been developed over the years. But you need frequency, so you need fast. You need to be, you need to be able to get on the bus basically when you want to go. So that's every 10, 12, 15 minutes. So there's an example in Aspen, Colorado, called the Velociraptor. It's dinosaurs. It's that big area. So they have this 40-mile bus rapid transit system. It's basically just buses running frequently. They built stations and little parking rides, and it provides great service. Right? It was I don't know, 20, 30 million. Basically, they had a federal grant in the tens of millions of dollars. So small improvements, uses existing roads. So you could do something like that, just get more buses, and you could create little transit centers, transit hubs, and you could provide much more frequent service, which would then make it viable, right? So so right now Maui Bus, right? I don't know what the current schedule is, but at the time, like their last trip might be at say 7 p.m. to coming back into town. If you're at work at a hotel, say your shift goes to 11, right? Automatically, you can't use a bus. So if you could create a bus rapid transit system or something that could operate over long, provide good service.
So, what do you think the everyday working class residents, what can they do to advocate a better transportation solution?
So there are a lot of planning processes. The Maui has what's called the Metropolitan Planning Organization, and they coordinate all the federal funding for transportation that comes in, and so they have plans. So basically, it's important to kind of get involved with the planning processes, get involved with government, politicians, and spread the ideas. And again, changing land use, changing the structure of our communities, that takes time. It takes a lot of effort, and it's difficult. But it can be done over time. The one thing I think I wanted to mention earlier, when you think about the impacts of our zoning, of our land use zoning, right? All the laws, all the permits, it creates a structure that does really kind of focus us on the automobile. A 3,000 square foot house on Maui, for example, at the time, you need 3 parking spaces, right? So each parking space is about 320 square feet. So when you think about just the land area that we're devoting to automobiles and the requirement, an average rental studio is about 472 square feet, right? So we're almost taking up as much space for off-street parking as we are to live in, right? So that's cost. That's extra cost for development. That's extra land costs. That it increases housing prices, it increases development, increases commercial. So it actually, to reduce housing prices and make our communities more efficient, part of it is kind of changing the system.
So, what if there was one major topic that you would want your readers to take away from this chapter? What would you want to?
Yeah, I think the main thing, the biggest takeaway is, we created these communities. Everything's done by design, right? So we create the laws, we create the zoning, this whole system, we designed it. So if we need to change it, right? If it's not working for us, if people can't afford homes, all that, we need to look at it differently. And that's where looking at other places, other countries, how they've kind of structured their cities and communities, can be instructive for us.
And one last question before we let you go. Okay. Where do you see the West Maui transportation system in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Where do you see that?
I mean, over the short term, you got to move the Honopi Highway. You got to move it off the away from the water, probably a lot of it's going to be still as usual. We're trying to decarbonize, so move to electric vehicles. That's going to change. But, if we could start getting in some of these, better transit systems and other alternatives, more bike lanes, bike facilities, then you could actually start to shift the land use. And
Well, Ryan, mahalo for being here. It's a lot of great information, a lot of things to think about. Okay. So once again, mahalo for
yeah, mahalo for the opportunity. Thank you.
All right. Till next time, ahui ho, malama pono.
Me kanani ku kila kila. Ola haina lona.